The platform at Sweetwater Station wasn't much. Warped planks, a sagging roof that leaked when it rained, and a hand-painted sign so faded you could barely read the town's name anymore. Clara had seen better stations in her travels, and worse ones too. This one fell somewhere in the middle, which felt appropriate. Everything about her life these days fell somewhere in the middle. Not quite tragic enough for pity, not quite hopeful enough for optimism. She adjusted her traveling bag against her hip and tried not to stare at the other women. 14 of them, by her count. Most couldn't be older than 22. Fresh faces, bright eyes, new dresses that hadn't yet been stained by travel or disappointment. They clustered together like flowers in a garden, laughing nervously, primping in pocket mirrors, whispering about which man looked kindest or strongest or wealthiest. Clara had stopped whispering years ago. First time. A voice beside her, too cheerful, too young. A blonde girl with ribbons in her hair and hope radiating off her like heat from summer stones. "No," Clara said simply. The girl blinked. "Oh, well, I'm sure this time will be different." Clara smiled thinly and didn't answer. This time wouldn't be different. It never was. The pattern had been established in Silver Creek, then repeated in Bent Fork, Red Bluff, Charity, Carson Flats, and Stillwater. The script rarely varied. Arrive, stand in line, watch younger women get chosen first, second, third. Watch the desperate men take the plain ones. Watch the dregs pair off out of mutual convenience. And then, when the music stopped and the chairs were all taken, climb back on the train with whatever dignity she could salvage. The mathematics were simple and cruel. She was 30. Most of these girls were 18, maybe 20. Men on the frontier didn't want a woman who'd lived 3 decades. They wanted youth, the promise of many children, the malleability of someone who hadn't yet formed strong opinions about how life should be lived. Clara had plenty of opinions. She'd been a school teacher in Boston for 8 years before the school board decided they preferred a man for the position. "Nothing personal, Miss Whitlock," the superintendent had said, not meeting her eyes. "Just that the older boys respond better to masculine authority." The older boys had loved her. She'd taught them history and literature, arithmetic and rhetoric. She'd stayed late to help the slow learners and arrived early to challenge the gifted ones. But that hadn't mattered. The new teacher was 26, fresh from seminary, and possessed the only qualification that trumped competence. He was male. She tried to find other work. Governess positions went to younger women. Shop work paid barely enough to afford a boarding house room. Her savings dwindled. Pride dwindled faster. Then she'd seen the advertisement. Women of good character sought for marriage to respectable men in the Western Territories. Travel expenses paid. New beginnings await. New beginnings. What a phrase. "Ladies!" A portly man in a vest too small for his belly climbed onto a crate, making it creak alarmingly. "Welcome to Sweetwater. I'm Mayor Sykes, and on behalf of our fine town, we're mighty pleased to have you here." He mopped his forehead with a handkerchief that had seen better days. "Now, we know you've had a long journey, so we've arranged for rooms at the boarding house where you can rest and freshen up. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll have a social at the church where you can meet our eligible bachelors. There'll be refreshments, music, and—" "Where are they?" someone called out. "The men, I mean." Nervous laughter rippled through the group. Sykes chuckled. "Some of the boys are working, can't leave their ranches or businesses unattended, you understand, but they'll all be at the social tomorrow, every last one of them." He paused, scanning the group. "We've got 23 fine men looking for wives, good men, hard workers. You ladies won't be disappointed. 23 men, 14 women. The math worked in their favor, at least. Unless you were Clara. The boarding house was better than expected. Clean sheets, a decent mattress, a window that actually opened. Clara unpacked her few belongings, 3 dresses, 1 skirt, 2 shirtwaists, underthings, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, and a book of Whitman poems so worn the spine had cracked in 3 places. She sat on the bed and opened the book to a random page. "I am large, I contain multitudes." Clara closed it again. She felt neither large nor multitudinous. She felt like a woman running out of chances. A knock at the door. "Miss Whitlock?" A woman's voice, older, steadier. "I'm Mrs. Brennan. I run the boarding house. Just wanted to make sure you had everything you need." Clara opened the door to find a woman in her 50s, gray-streaked hair pinned back, wearing a practical dress and an appraising look that Clara recognized, the look of someone who'd seen enough of life to make quick judgments. "I'm fine, thank you." "You've done this before." Not a question. Clara hesitated, then nodded. Mrs. Brennan's expression softened slightly. "Thought so. You've got that look about you, like you know what you're walking into." She paused. "The other girls, they think it's going to be like a church dance back home, all sweet courting and gentle proposals. And it's not? Oh, some of them will get that. The pretty ones usually do." Mrs. Brennan leaned against the doorframe. "But frontier men aren't like city men. They're practical. They need help, not decoration. A wife out here is a business partner as much as anything else." "That's what they all say," Clara said quietly. "Until they see a 20-year-old with a nice smile." Mrs. Brennan studied her for a long moment. "Maybe. But the smart ones, the ones worth having, they're looking for something that doesn't fade with age." She straightened up. "Supper's at 6. Don't be late or you'll miss the good portions." The social was held in a church that smelled of pine sap and hope. Someone had strung up paper decorations, and a fiddler sat in the corner playing something meant to be cheerful but coming out slightly off-key. Tables held lemonade and cookies that tasted like they'd been made 3 days ago. The women entered first, arranged along one wall like goods for inspection. Then the men came in. Clara had learned to read them quickly. Which ones were nervous, which ones were cocky, which ones were desperate. She saw ranch hands with sunburned faces and awkward postures, merchants with softer hands and calculating eyes, a few older widowers looking for someone to raise their children, young men with more optimism than prospects. They circulated through the room with varying degrees of subtlety. Some made a beeline for the prettiest girls. Others took their time, chatting with several women before making a choice. The confident ones claimed their favorites quickly. The shy ones lingered at the punch bowl, gathering courage. Clara stood near the back, next to a plain girl with a nervous laugh, and another woman who must have been close to 40, too old even by Clara's standards. The three of them formed an unspoken alliance of the overlooked. One by one, the pretty girls were swept into conversation. The moderately attractive ones followed. Then the young but plain ones found partners who valued youth over beauty. Clara waited. A merchant approached her, middle-aged, balding, with fingers stained from counting coins. "Miss Whitlock, is it?" "Yes." "I'm Horace Potter. I run the dry goods store." He didn't quite meet her eyes. "I'm looking for a wife with good sense, someone who can keep books and manage inventory. I can offer comfortable living quarters above the shop and—" "Do you love your work, Mr. Potter?" He blinked. "Love it? Your shop. Do you enjoy running it, or is it simply a necessity?" Well, it's my livelihood. I take pride in it." "But you don't love it." Clara kept her voice gentle. "Which means you'd resent a wife who was merely competent at bookkeeping rather than companionable at dinner." His mouth opened, closed. "That's rather presumptuous." "Perhaps. But I've learned that frontier marriages have enough hardships without adding fundamental incompatibility to the list." He left quickly after that. 2 more men tried. One wanted a mother for his 4 children and barely looked at Clara during the conversation. His eyes kept drifting to a 20-year-old blonde. The other was drunk and slurring about how he didn't mind an older woman as long as she could cook. By 8 o'clock, most of the matches had been made. Couples stood together, talking in low voices, making plans. The fiddler had given up and was eating cookies. Clara found herself back at the punch bowl, alone. "Well," said the 40-year-old woman beside her. Clara hadn't caught her name. "I suppose we're the leftovers again." "Appears so." "You'd think they'd at least pretend to consider us." The woman's voice carried more weariness than bitterness. "The merchants want bookkeepers, the ranchers want field hands, and they all want someone young enough to give them a dozen children." Clara poured herself more punch she didn't want. "What will you do?" "Go home, I suppose." "You?" Clara didn't answer because she didn't know. Boston held nothing for her, but neither apparently did Wyoming. She was considering slipping out early, sparing herself the final humiliation of standing alone while couples made their farewells, when the church door opened. The man who entered didn't belong with the others. He was tall, lean, in the way of men who worked hard and ate less than they should. His clothes were clean but worn, not the Sunday best the other men had donned, just work clothes that had seen honest use. Dark hair, longer than fashionable, touched the collar of his shirt. His face was weathered, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. 40, maybe. Hard to tell. But it was his eyes that struck her, gray as winter sky, and just as unforgiving. He scanned the room with the economy of someone who didn't waste time on unnecessary observation. His gaze passed over the coupled pairs, dismissed them, moved on. Lingered briefly on the few remaining unattached women, then settled on Clara. She froze, punch cup halfway to her lips. He crossed the room in long strides that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else but had business to conduct. The crowd parted automatically, the way people moved for men who carried a certain kind of presence. "You're new," he said when he reached her. His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. "Yes. From back east." Not a question, but she answered anyway. "Boston." He nodded as if this confirmed something. "You teach school." Clara's eyebrows rose. "How did you—" "The way you hold yourself. The way you talk to Potter. Heard that from across the room. You're educated." His eyes narrowed slightly. "And you've done this before. The bride gatherings." Heat crept up her neck. "Is it that obvious?" To someone paying attention, he glanced around the room. "Most of these fools don't look past a pretty face. They'll marry the first girl who blushes at them, and half those marriages will be miserable before the first snow." "And you're different?" "I'm practical." He said it without pride or apology, just statement of fact. "I need a partner, not a decoration. The ranch is 18 miles north of here, cattle operation, some horses. The work's hard. The winters are harder. Last woman I hired as a housekeeper lasted 3 weeks before she quit crying and caught the next train out." "That's quite a sales pitch," Clara said dryly. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "Not trying to sell you anything. Trying to be honest about what the life is." "Why me?" "Because you're still standing here." He gestured at the room. "Everyone else paired off with someone they'll learn to tolerate, or they left. You stayed. That means you're either desperate or stubborn." "Perhaps both." "Good. You'll need both." He paused. "I'm Caleb Vance." "Clara Whitlock." "I know. Ask Sykes about you." At her expression, he continued. "Former school teacher, 30 years old, unmarried, no family back east, worth mentioning. You've tried this 6 times before in 6 different towns." Embarrassment burned through her, but she kept her chin up. "Thorough research. Like I said, practical. I don't make decisions blind." His gaze held hers. "Question is whether you're interested in making one either." "You're proposing marriage to a woman you met 2 minutes ago." "No, I'm proposing we spend the next 3 days talking. Get to know each other's minds. See if we're compatible enough to build something that lasts." He crossed his arms. "End of 3 days. If either of us thinks it won't work, you get on the train and that's the end of it. No hard feelings." Clara studied him. He wasn't handsome. His face was too harsh, too marked by hard living. He wasn't charming, blunt to the point of rudeness. But there was something solid about him, something real in a way the other men hadn't been. "What do you get out of this?" she asked. "You could have your pick of younger women." "Younger doesn't mean better. I need someone with sense enough to handle problems when I'm out with the cattle. Someone who won't panic when things go wrong, and they will go wrong. Someone who understands that frontier life isn't romantic, it's survival." "You make it sound grim." "It is grim. Beautiful sometimes, but mostly grim." He tilted his head slightly. "You want pretty lies or honest truth?" "I've had enough lies." "Then we might get along." He uncrossed his arms. "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, meet me at the livery. We'll ride out to the ranch so you can see what you'd be getting into. Bring practical clothes. You'll ruin a good dress." "That's presumptuous." "That's practical. You can say no right now if you want." He waited. Clara should say no. This was insane. More insane than the bride gatherings themselves. 3 days with a stranger who looked at her like a potential business arrangement rather than a woman. A man who promised nothing but hardship and survival. But then she thought about the train ride back to Boston. The empty boarding house room. The slow erosion of hope until there was nothing left but resignation. 10 o'clock, she heard herself say. Caleb nodded once, sharp and final. "Don't be late. I won't wait." He turned and walked out of the church as abruptly as he'd entered, leaving Clara standing alone with her punch cup and a feeling like she'd just stepped off a cliff. Mrs. Brennan appeared at her elbow. Well, that was unexpected. You know him? Everyone knows Caleb Vance. Came here 5 years ago with nothing but a horse and determination. Built that ranch from bare ground. Nearly killed himself doing it. She paused. Lost his brother 2 winters back. Pneumonia. Since then, he's been alone out there. Why hasn't he married before now? Pride, mostly. Didn't want to bring a woman into that life until he could offer something more than a dirt floor and starvation rations. Mrs. Brennan gave Clara a searching look. He's not an easy man. Doesn't talk much. Doesn't soften hard truths. Doesn't know how to be gentle. But he's honest, keeps his word. And if he says he'll treat you as a partner, he means it. She patted Clara's arm. Just don't expect romance. Caleb Vance doesn't believe in it. That night, Clara lay awake listening to the other women in nearby rooms. Excited whispers, nervous giggles, the sounds of hope taking root. She felt none of that. What she felt was something colder and more solid. Not hope, exactly. More like determination. This was her 7th try. Her last try. And Caleb Vance, with his brutal honesty and his grim promises, might be her last chance at a life that was something other than slow defeat. She thought about his eyes. Hard as winter, but clear. Direct. She thought about his words. I need a partner, not a decoration. And she thought about how tired she was of being neither. When morning came, Clara dressed in her oldest skirt and most practical shirtwaist. She braided her hair tight and pinned it close to her head. She looked in the small mirror above the wash basin and saw what Caleb must have seen. A woman past her youth, past illusions, but not yet past fighting. She arrived at the livery at 10 o'clock exactly. Caleb was waiting with 2 horses already saddled. He gave her a single appraising look, nodded at her clothing choice, and handed her the reins without asking if she could ride. She could. Barely. Boston ladies didn't ride much, but she'd learned as a girl visiting her uncle's farm. They rode north in silence, leaving Sweetwater behind. The land opened up around them, vast and empty and beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Rolling hills covered in brown grass, distant mountains sharp against the sky, wind that never stopped, carrying the smell of sage and dust and something wild she couldn't name. After an hour, Caleb spoke. You ride better than I expected. Low bar to clear. That almost smile again. True enough. Another mile passed, then, why teaching? Clara glanced at him, but he was looking ahead, face unreadable. I liked it. Helping children understand things, watching them make connections. There's a satisfaction in that. Why'd you stop? They preferred a man. He snorted. Idiots. She found herself smiling despite everything. That was my assessment as well. You miss it? Every day. The admission surprised her with its honesty. I miss the purpose of it, feeling useful, mattering. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, then, there's no school within 20 miles of the ranch. Nearest one is in Sweetwater, and that's too far for kids from the outlying homesteads. He adjusted his reins. If you wanted to start something, even just a few hours a week for the ranch children and neighbors, wouldn't stop you. Something warm flickered in Clara's chest. You have children coming to the ranch? Not yet. But families are starting to settle in the area. Give it a year or 2, there'll be a need. He glanced at her, just thinking out loud. But he wasn't. He was showing her a future, showing her that he'd listened to what mattered to her and was making space for it in his vision of their life together. It was in its way more romantic than any pretty speech. The ranch appeared on the horizon around noon, a low house of rough-cut timber, a barn that listed slightly to one side, corrals and outbuildings scattered across the property. Nothing pretty about it, but solid, built to last. Caleb dismounted and helped her down, his hands firm and impersonal. House first, then I'll show you the rest. The house was small, one main room serving as kitchen and living space, a bedroom barely big enough for a bed, a loft overhead. Everything clean but Spartan, a stove that looked like it had seen hard use, a table with 2 mismatched chairs, shelves holding supplies in careful organization. It's not much, Caleb said, the first hint of something like discomfort in his voice. It's honest, Claire replied. She ran her hand along the table's edge. You built this? Most of it. Bought some materials in town, but did the work myself. She looked around again, seeing it differently now, not as poverty, but as possibility. The roof leaks? Not anymore. Fixed it last month. The stove works? Better than most. She met his eyes. Then it's enough to start with. Something eased in his expression. Not quite relief, but close. They spent the rest of the day walking the property. He showed her everything, the cattle scattered across the grazing land, the winter feed stores, the well, the garden plot that had been mostly unsuccessful, the creek that sometimes ran dry by August. He didn't embellish or hide anything. Every problem got stated plainly. Every challenge got acknowledged. It's a lot of work, he said finally, as they stood watching the sun drop toward the mountains. More than one person can handle alone. I've been managing, but barely. Another winter like the last one, I'd lose half the herd. What happened last winter? Snow came early, stayed late. Lost 30 head to starvation and cold. Spent 2 months barely sleeping, trying to keep the rest alive. His jaw tightened. That's when my brother died. He went out in a storm to check on the cattle, got turned around in the whiteout. Found him 2 days later frozen a quarter-mile from the house. I'm sorry. Me too. He was quiet a moment. Point is, this life can kill you if you're not careful. And even if you are careful, it might kill you anyway. You need to know that before you decide. Clara watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of copper and gold. What would my role be, specifically? Cooking, mostly. Keeping the house. Managing supplies so we don't run short in winter. Helping with the garden. We need to get better at that. And during calving season or roundup, extra hands wherever they're needed. He paused. I won't lie and say it's easy. Some days you'll work from dawn to dark and still not get everything done. But I'd be necessary. He looked at her. Essential. That word settled into her bones like an anchor. They rode back to Sweetwater as the stars came out. Caleb left her at the boarding house with a simple, tomorrow, same time, bring questions. Clara had 100 questions. She spent that night writing them down, then scratching them out, then writing new ones. Some were practical. How much money do you have saved? What happens if you get injured? Do you drink? Others cut deeper. Why do you want a wife now? What happened to make you so hard? Do you believe people can be happy or just surviving? By morning, she'd narrowed it to the ones that mattered most. They met at the livery again, but this time Caleb brought a wagon instead of horses. Thought we'd make a day of it. There's a spot about an hour north. Good view. Quiet. Better for talking than riding. The spot turned out to be a small rise overlooking a valley where a river cut through green land. Caleb spread a blanket and unpacked bread, cheese, and apples. They sat, and Clara asked her questions. Money? Caleb took a bite of bread, chewed thoughtfully. Enough saved to get through a bad year if we're careful. Not enough to be comfortable, but enough to survive. If you're injured? Got a neighbor 8 miles west, Tom Crawford. We have an arrangement. He helps me, I help him. It's how things work out here. Drinking? Occasionally, never to excess. Saw what that did to my father? Won't repeat his mistakes. She asked about his brother, and he talked for 20 minutes straight. The longest she'd heard him speak. About growing up in Missouri, their father's violence, running away together at 16 and 15, about wandering west, taking any work they could find, saving every penny, about the dream of having land that was theirs, where no one could tell them what to do or raise a hand to them. We were going to build it together, Caleb said quietly. The ranch. Make something that lasted. Then he died, and I've been trying to do it alone ever since. Why not hire help? Tried. No one wants to work that hard for what I can afford to pay. He met her eyes. That's why I need a partner. Someone who has stake in making it work. A wife, you mean? A wife who's also a partner. Not just someone keeping house while I do the real work. Someone who understands we're building this together. Claire took a breath. And if we can't have children? The question hung between them. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Would be a loss. I won't pretend otherwise, but it wouldn't be the end of the partnership. He picked up a stone, turned it over in his hand. I'm not marrying you for children, Clara. I'm marrying you because I think we could build something together that would last. Children would be part of that, if they come. But they're not the foundation. It was, she thought, The most honest answer anyone had ever given her. My turn, Caleb said. Why 7 times? Why keep trying? Clara looked out at the valley. Because the alternative was giving up, going back to Boston and accepting I'd failed, taking whatever work I could find and living in a boarding house until I was too old to work. Then, she shrugged. I don't know, the poorhouse, maybe. That's fear talking. What did you want? Not what you're running from, what you're running toward. No one had ever asked her that. Purpose, she said finally. Mattering to someone. Contributing something meaningful instead of just existing. She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. I'm good at things, Caleb. I'm smart and capable and strong, but none of that mattered in Boston. I was just a spinster taking up space. You'd matter here. Would I? Or would I just be free labor with a marriage certificate? He flinched slightly, the first real reaction she'd seen crack his composure. Fair question. He set down the stone. I can't promise I'll be a good husband. Don't really know how. Never saw a good marriage growing up, and I've been alone too long to know how to share a life with someone. Then why marry at all? Because I'm tired of being alone. Because the work is too much for one person, and because... He stopped, started again. Because I think you and I might understand each other. We're both practical people who've been dealt bad hands and are trying to make something better. That's a foundation worth building on. They talked until the sun was high, then packed up and drove back slowly. That night, Clara wrote in the small journal she kept, He's not what I expected. Harder in some ways, but more honest than any man I've met. I think I could work with him. The question is whether I could live with him. The third day, Caleb took her to meet the Crawfords, the neighbors he'd mentioned. Tom Crawford was a weathered man in his 50s with a wife named Beth, who looked Clara up and down with sharp eyes before apparently deciding she passed muster. So you're the one Caleb's been talking about, Beth said, pouring coffee that could strip paint. Talking about? Wrote over 2 days ago asking if we thought he was crazy for proposing to a stranger. Beth smiled, told him he was, but that most good things in life require a little craziness. They stayed for lunch. Clara watched how Caleb interacted with the Crawfords, easy respect, genuine warmth hidden under the gruff exterior. Tom asked about her teaching, and she found herself explaining her methods, her philosophy. When she finished, Beth was nodding. We've got 3 young ones who need schooling, Beth said. If you start teaching out at Caleb's place, we'd send them over, pay you what we can. It was the first time someone had offered her work, real work, in months. On the ride back, Caleb said, You were good with them. They're nice people. They're the only people within 10 miles. If you can't get along with them, you'll be lonely as hell. Clara laughed, surprised the sound came out. Always with the romantic words. That almost smile. Just being practical. I know. She looked at him. That's what I'm starting to like about you. His hands tightened on the reins, but he said nothing. That evening, they sat on the boarding house porch, the last of the 3 days. Well, Caleb said. Clara had been thinking about this moment since she'd agreed to his proposal. She'd analyzed it from every angle, weighed every risk, considered every outcome. But in the end, it came down to something simple. Going back to Boston meant defeat. Staying meant risk. And she was tired of being defeated. I have conditions, she said. Name them. I want a real partnership, not you making all the decisions and me following orders. We discuss things. We decide together. Agreed. I want to teach. Even if it's just a few hours a week, I need that. Already said you could. And I want honesty, always. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. I can do that. But I need something too. What? Patience. I'm not good at this. At people. At talking. At all the things that come easy to others. I'll mess up. Say the wrong thing. Forget things that matter. But I'll try. His jaw set. I just need you to be patient while I figure it out. Clara felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked tight for years. I can do that, she whispered. Caleb stood, held out his hand. Not romantic, not gentle, just solid and real and there. Clara took it. Tomorrow then, he said. We'll see the preacher. Tomorrow. He nodded once and left. Clara sat alone on the porch, watching stars appear one by one in the Wyoming sky, and thought, this is insane. This is impossible. This might actually work. The preacher's house smelled like old books and boiled cabbage. Reverend Marsh was a thin man with kind eyes who didn't ask questions when Caleb showed up at dawn with Clara beside him. You're sure about this? He asked them both, not unkindly. Yes, Caleb said. Clara nodded. Then let's not waste time. Marsh pulled out a worn Bible and a registry book. I'll need 2 witnesses. Mrs. Marsh appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, and they pulled in a neighbor who happened to be passing by, a ranch hand named Dutch, who looked confused but willing. The ceremony took 7 minutes. No flowers, no music, no guests whispering in pews, just words spoken plainly in a cramped front room while morning light slanted through dusty windows. Do you, Caleb Vance, take this woman? I do. Let me finish the question. Sorry, Clara almost laughed. Almost. When it was her turn, she said the words carefully, tasting each one. I do. Marsh pronounced them married. Caleb shook his hand. Clara signed the registry with hands that only trembled slightly, and just like that, she was Mrs. Vance. They walked back to the boarding house in silence. Clara packed her few belongings while Caleb waited downstairs with the wagon. Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway as Clara folded her last dress. Well, you did it. I did. Any regrets yet? Clara thought about it honestly. Ask me in a month. Mrs. Brennan smiled. Fair enough. Here. She pressed a small package into Clara's hands. Wedding gift. Open it later. Clara tucked it into her bag without looking. Thank you for everything. Just survive the first winter. That's thanks enough. The older woman's expression softened. And don't let that man's rough edges fool you. He's harder on himself than he'll ever be on you. The ride north felt different than before. The landscape looked the same, rolling brown grass, distant mountains, endless sky, but Clara was seeing it through changed eyes. This wasn't a place she was visiting anymore. This was home. Or it would be. Caleb drove the wagon with the same economical silence he did everything else. After an hour, Clara said, Are we going to talk about it? About what? The fact that we just got married. He glanced at her. What's to talk about? We agreed on the terms, did the thing. Now we make it work. That's it? No discussion about expectations, or we spent 3 days discussing expectations. He adjusted the reins. I'm not much for talking just to fill silence. If you need something said, I'll say it, but I won't waste words on things we already covered. It should have irritated her. Instead, she found it almost refreshing. How many conversations in Boston had been nothing but empty pleasantries and careful avoidance of anything real? Fine, she said. Then tell me about the cattle. So he did. For the next hour, Caleb explained his operation, the number of head he ran, the breeding program he was trying to establish, the markets in Cheyenne where he sold stock, the constant battle against predators and weather, and his own limited resources. He talked about cattle the way other men talked about children, with a mix of frustration and fierce protectiveness. Clara listened and asked questions. Good ones, apparently, because Caleb kept glancing at her with something that might have been approval. You actually care, he said finally. Why wouldn't I? It's our livelihood now. Our. He tested the word. Going to take some getting used to. They reached the ranch as the sun climbed toward noon. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the house and helped Clara down. She stood looking at the rough timber structure that was now hers, feeling the weight of it settle onto her shoulders. I'll get your things, Caleb said, reaching for her bag. I can carry it. I know you can, but I'm doing it anyway. He hefted the bag easily. Pick your battles, Clara. This one's not worth fighting. She followed him inside. The house looked exactly as it had 3 days ago. Clean, spare, waiting. Caleb set her bag on the floor and stood there awkwardly, as if unsure what to do next. The bedroom's yours, he said finally. I'll sleep in the loft. Clara stared at him. What? The bedroom, it's... I heard you, I just don't understand. We're married. His jaw tightened. In name. We barely know each other. We knew that when we agreed to this. Doesn't mean we have to rush things. He wouldn't quite meet her eyes. Thought we'd take our time, get comfortable with each other first. Clara felt something twist in her chest, relief mixed with disappointment mixed with confusion. How long? However long it takes. He finally looked at her. I'm not expecting anything from you, Clara. Not that. Not until you're ready, if you're ever ready. She should have been grateful. Any other man would have considered marriage a license to take whatever he wanted, but Caleb was giving her space, time, respect, so why did it feel like rejection? Fine, she said quietly. The bedroom's mine. He nodded and escaped outside so fast she almost laughed. The first week passed in a blur of work and adjustment. Clara woke before dawn to cook breakfast, biscuits and bacon and coffee strong enough to strip rust. Caleb ate quickly and left to tend the cattle. She spent the mornings learning the house, taking inventory of supplies, discovering what needed fixing or replacing or scrubbing within an inch of its life. The garden was a disaster, weeds choking out the few struggling vegetables, soil dry and depleted. Clara spent an afternoon pulling weeds and nearly cried at the state of it. She'd never gardened in her life. In Boston, vegetables came from markets. Out here, they came from backbreaking labor or not at all. That evening, Caleb came in to find her sitting at the table with dirt under her nails and frustration in her eyes. Garden's worse than I thought, he said, washing his hands in the basin. It's terrible. I don't even know where to start. Beth Crawford knows gardening. I'll ask her to come by, show you some things. I should know how to do this already. Why? You're a teacher, not a farmer. He dried his hands. None of us knows everything. That's why we help each other. It was the kindest thing he'd said to her all week. Beth came by 2 days later with seeds, advice, and a practical attitude that made Clara feel less incompetent. They spent the morning amending soil and planning what to plant. Takes time, Beth said, tamping dirt around a tomato seedling. First year's always rough. By the third year, you'll have more vegetables than you know what to do with. If I make it 3 years, Beth gave her a sharp look. You having doubts already? No, just realistic ones. Good. Doubt keeps you honest. Beth sat back on her heels. Caleb's a good man, but he's not an easy one. Don't expect him to change overnight. I'm not expecting him to change at all. Smart woman, Beth smiled. Though between you and me, he's already changing. Came by our place last week asking about table manners. Said he didn't want to embarrass you. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. He did? Tom told him not to eat with his mouth open and to use a napkin once in a while. Caleb looked like we'd asked him to learn French. Beth stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. My point is, he's trying, in his own way. After Beth left, Clara looked at Caleb differently. Noticed small things, how he'd started using the napkin she'd set out at meals, how he washed up before coming to the table, instead of just rinsing his hands, how he asked if she needed anything from town before making supply runs. Tiny gestures, easily missed, but they were there. 2 weeks in, the first real argument hit. Clara had spent the morning cleaning, sweeping, organizing. She'd moved some of Caleb's tools from the main room to the barn, thinking it would make the space feel less cluttered. When he came in for lunch and couldn't find his leather working kit, his face went dark. Where is it? The barn. You thought wrong. He went outside, came back with the kit, slammed it on the table hard enough to make the dishes rattle. Don't move my things without asking. I was trying to make the house more livable. It was livable fine. For you, maybe. I'd like to sit in the main room without tripping over tools. Then watch where you're walking. Clara felt her temper snap. This is my house too, Caleb. You said we were partners. That means I get a say in how we organize things. Not when it comes to my work gear. I need to know where things are. Then keep them in the barn where they belong. They stared at each other across the table. Caleb's jaw was set, his eyes hard. Clara refused to back down. Finally, he said, Fine. I'll keep most of it in the barn. But I need a shelf in here for things I use daily, and you ask before moving anything from that shelf. Agreed. And you ask before leaving dirty boots in the middle of the floor where I'll trip on them in the dark. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Deal. The tension broke. Not completely, but enough. That night, Caleb built a shelf along one wall while Clara made dinner. They didn't talk much, but the silence felt less heavy than before. The next morning, she found a small wooden box on the kitchen table. Inside were 3 hair ribbons, nothing fancy, just plain cotton in faded colors, and a note in crude handwriting. Found these in town. Thought you might want them. Clara held the ribbons and felt her throat tighten. They were probably second-hand, bought from someone's cast-offs. They didn't match anything she owned. But Caleb had thought of her while in town, had spent money they didn't have to spare on something purely decorative. She wore the blue one that day. When Caleb came in for lunch, he noticed but said nothing. Just looked at her hair for a moment, then nodded once and sat down to eat. A month passed, then 6 weeks. Clara fell into rhythms she'd never imagined. Waking before the sun, cooking meals that fueled hard labor, scrubbing clothes on a washboard until her knuckles cracked, learning to make soap and candles and bread that didn't taste like sawdust. Her hands, once soft and ink-stained from teaching, grew rough and calloused. She hated it sometimes. The endless work, the isolation, the way her body ached from unfamiliar labor. She'd lie in bed at night, alone in the small bedroom, and wonder what the hell she'd been thinking. But then morning would come, and Caleb would be at the table drinking coffee, and they'd plan the day's work together. Partners, equals. And that made the blisters and backaches worth bearing. In late August, a crisis hit. Clara woke to Caleb pounding on her door. "Get up. Cattle broke through the north fence. I need help." She dressed in seconds and followed him outside. The sky was barely gray with pre-dawn light. Caleb had 2 horses already saddled. "You remember how to ride?" "Enough to not fall off." "Good enough. Stay with me and do what I say." They rode hard across the rangeland. Clara gripped the saddle and tried not to think about how high up she was or how fast they were moving. When they reached the broken fence, she saw cattle scattered across the landscape, dozens of them, wandering toward the steep ravine a quarter-mile away. "We need to turn them back before they reach that drop," Caleb said. "Get behind them, make noise, push them toward me. Don't try to get fancy, just keep them moving in the right direction." Clara had never herded cattle in her life. But she did what he said, riding behind the wandering animals and shouting until her voice went hoarse. The cattle, bless them, were too stupid to run in different directions. They clustered together and moved as a mass. It took 3 hours. By the time they had the herd back on the right side of the fence, Clara was soaked with sweat, her throat raw, her legs screaming from gripping the horse. Caleb dismounted and started repairs on the fence. Clara slid off her horse and nearly collapsed. "You all right?" Caleb asked without looking up from his work. "Perfect. Just need to remember how to walk." "You did good. Most people freeze up their first cattle drive." "That was hardly a drive." "Still counts." He pounded a post into the ground. "Couldn't have done it without you." Those words carried her through the rest of the day. That evening, as they ate dinner in companionable silence, Caleb said, "I've been thinking." "Dangerous activity." He almost smiled. "About the teaching. The Crawford kids need schooling, like Beth said. And Tom mentioned there's 2 other families within riding distance with young ones. That's enough for a small school." Clara set down her fork. "You're serious. You wanted purpose. This would give it to you." He met her eyes. "I can clear out part of the barn, set up some benches and a desk. Won't be fancy, but it'd work. You could teach 3 days a week maybe, mornings, so you're back before dark." She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "That would cost money. Materials, books. I've got a little saved, and the families would pay what they could. Won't make us rich, but it'd help." He shifted in his chair. "Besides, you're miserable without it. I can see it." "I'm not miserable." "You're not happy either, not the way you were when you talked about teaching that day at the Crawfords." His voice softened slightly. "I want you to be happy, Clara, or at least not completely miserable." She reached across the table and took his hand. He froze, surprised, but didn't pull away. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's practical. Happy wife works better than a miserable one." But his hand stayed in hers for a long moment before he gently pulled back and cleared the dishes. September brought the first real cold. Clara woke one morning to frost on the windows and Caleb already up, stoking the fire. "Winter comes early here," he said. "Need to start preparing." The next weeks were a frenzy of preparation. They cut firewood until Clara's shoulders burned. They moved the cattle closer to the ranch buildings. They checked and rechecked supplies, made lists of what they'd need from town before the first snow made travel difficult. Caleb worked from dawn to well past dark, and Clara matched him hour for hour. At night, they'd collapse into chairs by the fire, too tired to talk. One evening, Clara unwrapped the package Mrs. Brennan had given her on her wedding day. Inside was a book, a collection of Robert Frost poems, and a note for the long winter nights. She read aloud by firelight that evening while Caleb mended harness leather. She didn't ask if he wanted to hear it, just started reading. He didn't tell her to stop. After a while, she glanced over and saw him listening, his hands still working but his face relaxed in a way she rarely saw. "You like poetry?" she asked. "Don't know much about it, but your voice is nice to listen to." It was the closest he'd come to a compliment. She kept reading. In October, the school began. Clara had 5 students, the 3 Crawford children, a boy from the Hanson homestead, and a girl whose family had just arrived from Ohio. They ranged in age from 6 to 12. They sat on rough benches in the converted barn section while Clara taught reading, arithmetic, history, and writing. She'd forgotten how much she loved it, the way young minds worked through problems, the satisfaction of watching understanding dawn on a child's face. The purpose of shaping the next generation. Caleb would sometimes stop by during his work, ostensibly to get tools from the barn, but really to listen for a few minutes. Once, she caught him smiling at something one of the children said. That night he told her, "You're good at this. Better than I expected." High praise. "I mean it. Those kids actually listen to you. They respect you." "Unlike my husband?" He looked startled. "I respect you." "I know. I'm teasing." "Oh." He frowned. "I'm not always good at knowing when you're doing that." "I've noticed." She set down her mending. "Caleb, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why haven't you—" She struggled for the right words. "It's been almost 3 months. You still sleep in the loft. You barely touch me except to help me on or off a horse. Are you waiting for something specific, or do you just not want—" "It's not that I don't want." His voice came out rough. "Hell, Clara, sometimes I can barely breathe for wanting." Her heart kicked against her ribs. "Then what?" He stood abruptly, paced to the window. "I don't know how to do this, the marriage part. My father used my mother like property. Took what he wanted, when he wanted, and she just had to endure it. I swore I'd never be like him." "You're nothing like that." "How do you know? You barely know me." "I know enough." She stood too. "I know you gave me time to adjust. I know you respect my opinions. I know you're patient and thoughtful and probably the most decent man I've ever met." He turned to face her. "I'm afraid I'll mess this up. Hurt you somehow. Do something wrong." Clara crossed the room until she stood in front of him. "You will mess up, so will I. That's part of being human." She took a breath. "But hiding from each other isn't going to build the partnership we agreed on." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm ready. If you are." Caleb searched her face for a long moment. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached out and touched her cheek. His hand was rough from work, gentle in a way that made her chest ache. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He kissed her then, awkward at first, unpracticed, but honest. Real. That night, he didn't sleep in the loft. The next morning, Clara woke to find Caleb already up, making coffee. When she came out of the bedroom, he glanced at her with something almost like shyness. "Morning." "Morning." She sat at the table, suddenly uncertain. "So, that happened." "It did." He poured coffee with extra care. "Any regrets?" "No, you?" "No." He set the cup in front of her. "Though I'm probably supposed to say something romantic now, and I don't know what that would be." Clara laughed, the sound surprising them both. "How about we skip the romance and stick with honesty?" "I can do that." He sat across from her. "Honest truth? Last night meant something to me. Don't know how to explain it better than that." "It meant something to me, too." They looked at each other across the table, 2 practical people who'd made a practical arrangement that was slowly becoming something else. "Guess we're really married now," Caleb said. "Guess so." He nodded once, stood, kissed the top of her head, quick and uncertain, and went out to start the day's work. Clara sat alone in the kitchen, drinking her coffee and feeling something warm and terrifying take root in her chest. Not love. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. November arrived with the first snow. Just a dusting at first, enough to frost the grass and make the mornings bitter. Caleb's mood shifted, became more focused, more tense. He checked the cattle constantly, reinforced shelter, calculated feed stores with an intensity that bordered on obsession.
"It's just early snow," Clara said one evening. "It'll melt." This is how it started last year. Light snow in November, then hell in December. His jaw clenched. "I won't lose the herd again. Can't afford to." She understood then. It wasn't just about the cattle. It was about his brother, about failure, about the fear that one wrong decision would cost them everything. "What can I do?" He looked surprised. "Nothing. This is our problem, our herd, our winter." She crossed her arms. "Tell me what needs doing." So he did. And for the next weeks, they worked as a true team. Clara learned to recognize sick cattle, to mix feed, to break ice on water troughs. Her hands went raw from the cold. Her muscles ached. But she didn't complain. One morning, as they worked side by side in the barn, Caleb said quietly, "I couldn't do this without you." Clara looked at him. His face was serious, that rough honesty she'd come to depend on. "Yes, you could. You did it last year." "Barely, and it nearly broke me." He held her gaze. "This year's different. You're here. That makes everything different." It wasn't poetry. It wasn't even particularly romantic, but coming from Caleb, it meant everything. The real snow came in mid-December, and it came with a vengeance. Clara woke to a world erased by white. The windows were completely covered, the door blocked by a drift that reached past her waist when Caleb finally forced it open. Wind screamed across the plains like something alive and furious. "How bad?" she asked, watching him assess the situation with that grim focus she'd learned to recognize.
"Bad enough." He pulled on his heaviest coat. "Cattle will be huddled near the windbreak, but I need to check on them. Make sure none wandered off. I'm coming with you." "No, too dangerous." "Caleb, I said no." His voice was sharp. "I lost my brother in weather like this. I won't risk you too." The fear in his eyes stopped her argument cold. She nodded, hating it, and watched him disappear into the white wall beyond the door. He was gone for 6 hours. Clara spent that time feeding the fire, melting snow for water, trying not to imagine Caleb lost in the whiteout like his brother had been. She stood at the window even though she couldn't see anything, as if staring hard enough would bring him back safely. When he finally stumbled through the door, he was covered in ice, his lips blue, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't work the buttons on his coat. Clara stripped the frozen layers off him, wrapped him in blankets, made him drink hot coffee until color returned to his face. "The cattle?" she asked when he could speak again. "Lost 2 calves. Rest are holding." His teeth still chattered. "Found them just in time. Another hour and we'd have lost more." "You could have died out there." "Didn't, though." He tried to smile and failed. "Takes more than snow to kill a Vance." But Clara had seen the fear in him when he'd told her about his brother. She knew exactly how fragile that bravado was. That night, she held him while he slept, listening to his breathing even out, feeling the warmth return to his skin. And she understood with sudden clarity that she loved this man, not despite his rough edges and blunt words, but because of them. Because he was real in a way nothing else in her life had ever been. The storm lasted 3 days. They were trapped inside, rationing firewood, eating through their food stores faster than planned. The house creaked under the weight of snow. Wind found every crack and gap in the walls, bringing cold that no fire could fully defeat. Clara had never been so cold in her life. Even wrapped in every blanket they owned, sitting close to the stove, she couldn't get warm. Her fingers went numb. Her breath came out in clouds. "Come here," Caleb said on the second night, opening his arms. She didn't hesitate. They huddled together under the blankets, sharing body heat, listening to the storm rage outside. "Tell me about Boston," he said quietly. "Distract me from thinking about the cattle." So she did. She told him about the narrow brick streets, the harbor smell, the bells of the Old North Church, about her small apartment above a bakery, waking to the scent of fresh bread, about the library where she'd spent her free hours, the parks in spring, the way snow looked different there, cleaner somehow, more civilized. "Do you miss it?" Caleb asked. Clara thought about it honestly. "Sometimes. I miss the convenience of it. Being able to walk to a store, see a play, have a conversation with someone other than my husband." She felt him tense and added quickly, "But I don't miss the loneliness, the feeling of being invisible. At least here, I matter." "You matter." His arms tightened around her. "More than you know." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and when Clara woke in the gray dawn light, she realized it was the first time in months she'd felt truly warm. The storm finally broke on the fourth day. Caleb went out immediately to check the herd. Clara started digging out the house, her muscles screaming from the effort of moving snow that had drifted as high as the roof in places. When Caleb returned hours later, his face was drawn. "Lost 8 head. 2 more won't make it through the week." Clara's heart sank. She knew what those numbers meant. Money they didn't have, income they'd counted on, the difference between surviving winter and not. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad, but we'll manage." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Might have to sell some equipment in spring, or take on debt." "There has to be another way. If there is, I haven't thought of it yet." He slumped into a chair, suddenly looking older than his years. "This is my fault. Should have moved them closer to shelter earlier. Should have—" "Stop!" Clara knelt in front of him. "You did everything you could. The storm was worse than anyone expected." "Doesn't matter. I'm responsible for this operation. When things go wrong, that's on me." "On us," she corrected. "We're partners, remember? That means the failures are shared too." He finally looked at her, and she saw the weight he'd been carrying alone for too long. The ranch, the debt, the memory of his brother, the fear of not being enough. "I don't know how to share failure," he said quietly. "Only ever knew how to carry it myself." "Then learn." She took his rough hands in hers. "That's what marriage is, isn't it? Carrying things together that would break us alone." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite relief, but close. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You're just now noticing." That got a real smile out of him. Small, but real. They spent the rest of December digging out, tending the surviving cattle, stretching their supplies. Clara's teaching had to stop. The snow was too deep for the children to travel safely. She missed it more than she'd expected. The house felt smaller without that purpose to look forward to. Christmas came and went without celebration. They didn't have energy or resources for festivity. But on Christmas morning, Clara found a small wooden box beside her coffee cup. Inside was a carved bird, rough work, but clearly made with care. "Made it while you were sleeping," Caleb said, not looking at her. "Thought you might like it." Clara turned the carving over in her hands. It was a songbird, wings spread like it was about to take flight. The detail was surprising. Individual feathers, tiny claws, a beak slightly open as if mid-song. "It's beautiful." "It's crooked. Wings not quite right." "I love it." She set it carefully on the shelf. "I didn't get you anything." "Don't need anything." But he looked pleased despite himself. That afternoon, Clara read poetry aloud while Caleb worked on mending tack. They ate a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. It was the worst Christmas either of them had ever had. It was also, somehow, one of the best. January brought a brief thaw, then more snow. February was a blur of cold and darkness and work that never ended. Clara learned to live with perpetually chapped hands, with clothes that never fully dried, with the taste of coffee that had been reheated too many times. She also learned what it meant to be truly partnered with someone. When she was too tired to cook, Caleb made dinner without complaint. When he was sick with a fever for 3 days, she nursed him and handled the ranch work alone. They moved around each other with increasing ease, developing the rhythm of people who'd been together for years rather than months. But the strain showed in other ways. Hashans. One evening in late February, Clara snapped at Caleb for tracking mud through the house she'd just cleaned. He snapped back that she was welcome to do the cattle work herself if she wanted him to stay outside all day. The argument escalated, words getting sharper, voices getting louder, all the stress of the winter finding an outlet. "You don't appreciate anything I do," Clara shouted. "I appreciate it. I just don't have time to stop and thank you every 5 minutes. I'm not asking for thanks every 5 minutes. I'm asking you to notice that I'm working myself to death trying to keep us alive." "You think I don't notice? You think I don't see how hard you're working?" Caleb's face was flushed. "I see everything, Clara. Every sacrifice, every effort. But I don't know how to say it in ways that sound right to you." The anger drained out of her suddenly. "Then say it in ways that sound right to you." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, roughly, "You're the strongest person I know. Stronger than me in ways that matter. And I'm sorry I don't tell you that enough." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I'm not that strong. I'm terrified most of the time. Terrified we won't make it. Terrified I'm not enough. You're enough. He crossed the room, pulled her into his arms. More than enough. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the dim kitchen while wind rattled the windows. We're going to make it, Caleb said finally. We have to. Clara wanted to believe him. March arrived with mud instead of snow. The world began to thaw, revealing all the damage winter had hidden. Fences were down in 3 places. The barn roof had a leak. 2 of the windows had cracked from the cold. The cattle that had survived looked gaunt and exhausted. So did Caleb. He'd lost weight over the winter, his face drawn and haggard. He worked from before dawn to after dark, trying to repair everything at once. Clara watched him push himself past exhaustion, past good sense, and didn't know how to make him stop. You need to rest, she told him one evening when he came in after dark for the 3rd night running. Can't. Too much to do. You're going to collapse. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're exhausted. And when you're this tired, you make mistakes. I don't have the luxury of rest. His voice was flat. We're behind on everything. If I don't get the repairs done now, we'll lose more cattle come summer. And if you kill yourself from exhaustion, we'll lose everything. They stared at each other across the kitchen table. Clara saw the stubborn set of his jaw and knew he wasn't going to listen, so she changed tactics. Fine, then I'm helping. You already help. No, I mean really helping. With the fence repairs, the roof, all of it. You show me what to do, and we do it together. Twice the hands means half the time. Clara, ook. We're partners, Caleb. That's what you wanted, so let me be one. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, finally nodded. All right. But you follow my instructions exactly. Some of this work is dangerous. I can handle dangerous. As it turned out, she could. Clara learned to string barbed wire without tearing her hands to shreds. She learned to patch a roof, to brace a fence post, to coax a frightened cow out of a mud pit. The work was brutal, but there was satisfaction in it too, in seeing tangible results, in knowing she was contributing to their survival in ways that mattered. One afternoon, as they worked on replacing a section of fence, Tom Crawford rode up with his son. Heard you had damage, Tom said. Thought you could use extra hands. They worked together until sunset, the 4 of them making progress that would have taken Caleb days alone. When they finished, Tom refused payment. That's what neighbors do, he said. Besides, you helped me dig out my well last fall. We're even. After they left, Caleb stood looking at the repaired fence with something like wonder. Couldn't have done that alone. That's the point, Clara said. You don't have to. Something eased in him after that day. Not completely. Caleb would probably carry the weight of responsibility until he died. But enough that he stopped working himself to collapse. Enough that he started accepting help when it was offered. In April, the school resumed. The children returned, older somehow after the winter break, more serious. They'd all lost something during the hard months, a grandparent, livestock, a sibling to illness. The frontier took without mercy. But Clara saw resilience in them too. The way they helped each other with lessons, the way they shared the precious pencils and paper, the way they soaked up knowledge like it was water in a drought. One day, the oldest Crawford girl stayed after class. Miss Clara, can I ask you something? Of course, Emma. How did you get so brave? Clara almost laughed. I'm not brave. I'm just doing what needs doing. But you came out here alone, married a stranger, survived the winter when lots of people died. Emma twisted her hands together. That seems brave to me. Clara studied the girl, 12 years old, on the cusp of womanhood, looking for models of what that could mean. You want to know the truth? I wasn't brave. I was desperate. But desperation forced me to do brave things, and after a while the brave things became just things, ordinary parts of life. So bravery is just doing what scares you until it doesn't scare you anymore? Something like that, Clara smiled. Though some things never stop being scary. You just get better at doing them anyway. Emma nodded slowly. I think I understand. After she left, Clara sat in the quiet barn-turned classroom and thought about that conversation. About how she'd arrived in Wyoming broken and desperate, and somehow, through work and stubbornness and Caleb's steady presence, had become someone a young girl saw as brave. That evening, she told Caleb about it. The Crawford girl thinks I'm brave, she said, half amused. Can you imagine?
I can. He looked up from the harness he was mending. You are brave. Braver than you give yourself credit for. I'm just surviving. That's what bravery is out here. He set down his work. Soft people don't last a Wyoming winter. You did. That counts for something. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. I had help. We helped each other. He stood, crossed to where she sat. That's the only reason either of us made it. He kissed her then, not tentative like those first times, but sure, certain, like a man who knew what he wanted and knew he was allowed to take it. Later, in the darkness of their bedroom, Clara traced the scars on Caleb's shoulder, old marks from his father's belt that he'd told her about in whispered confessions during long winter nights. Do you ever think about him? She asked. Your father. Sometimes. Usually when I'm afraid of becoming like him. You're nothing like him. How do you know? You never met him. I know you. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat. I know you'd rather die than hurt someone the way he hurt you and your brother. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then, when my brother died, part of me was relieved. Clara went still. Not that he was dead, Caleb continued roughly, but that he didn't have to struggle anymore, didn't have to fight every day just to survive. He was tired, Clara, so tired. And the frontier just kept taking and taking until there was nothing left. Are you tired? She asked quietly. Not anymore. His arms tightened around her. Used to be. Before you came. But now I have a reason to keep fighting that's bigger than just survival. What reason? You, us, the life we're building. He paused. The possibility that maybe we could have a family, leave something behind that matters. Clara's breath caught. They hadn't talked about children directly since that first conversation months ago. Do you want that? A family? Yeah, I do. He sounded almost surprised by his own admission. Didn't think I did. Thought the ranch was enough. But watching you with those kids at school, seeing how good you are with them, yeah, I want that. Clara felt tears slide down her face in the darkness. I want that too. They lay together in silence, holding each other, imagining a future that felt suddenly possible instead of just theoretical. May brought wildflowers and grass greening across the hills. The cattle fattened on new growth. Caleb's face lost some of its winter gauntness. Clara's hands, though still calloused, began to heal. They celebrated their first anniversary without fanfare, just a quiet dinner and the same direct honesty they'd started with. Well, Caleb said over coffee, we made it a year. We did. You have any regrets? Clara thought about it. About the blisters and backaches and bone-deep exhaustion. About the fear and arguments and moments when she'd wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. About the loneliness of winter and the crushing weight of responsibility. No, she said finally. You? No. He reached across the table, took her hand. Best decision I ever made, asking you to marry me. You didn't ask. You proposed a 3-day trial. Semantics. His mouth quirked. Point is, you're stuck with me now. Funny. I was going to say the same to you. In June, Clara realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't said anything, afraid to hope. But when another month passed without her courses, she couldn't deny it anymore. She told Caleb one evening after dinner, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. I'm going to have a baby. He froze, coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Set it down carefully. You're sure? As sure as I can be without a doctor, but yes, I'm sure. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen from him, wide and unguarded, and full of something that looked like joy. A baby, he said, like he couldn't quite believe it. A baby. He stood, pulled her into his arms, held her like she was made of glass. We're going to have a baby. Clara laughed against his chest. That's what I just said. I know, I can't. He pulled back to look at her. You're happy about this? Terrified. But yes, happy. Me too. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. We need to get you to a doctor, make sure everything's all right.
And we'll need to prepare. The baby will need a cradle, clothes, and we should probably add another room to the house. And Caleb, breathe. He stopped, took a breath. Sorry, I know, she smiled. But we have time. Months yet. Months, he repeated. Then, quieter. Are you scared? Yes. Childbirth is dangerous out here. No hospital, no... I'll get Beth Crawford to help. She's delivered half the babies in the territory. And if there's any trouble, I'll ride for the doctor in Sweetwater. I don't care how far it is. Clara heard the fear under his determination. He'd already lost his brother. The thought of losing her too must be eating him alive. I'm strong, she said. Stronger than I was when I arrived. We'll be fine. You don't know that. No. But I believe it. She took his face in her hands. We've survived everything else. We'll survive this too. He nodded, but she could see the worry that would plague him for the next months. The fear that loving someone meant giving them the power to destroy you by leaving. That night, Caleb built a fire even though it was warm out, and they sat together in the gathering dusk. He kept his hand on her still flat stomach as if he could protect the life growing there through sheer determination. Tell me what kind of father you want to be, Claire said softly. The opposite of mine. He said it immediately, fiercely. Patient, kind. Someone who builds up instead of tearing down. You'll be good at that. How do you know? Because you're good at it with me. He looked at her, surprised. I'm not always patient with you. No, but you try. And when you mess up, you admit it and do better. She leaned against him. That's all anyone can ask. They sat in silence for a while, watching stars appear one by one. Then Caleb said, My brother would have loved this, being an uncle. He always wanted family. Tell me about him, the good parts. So he did. For the first time since Clara had known him, Caleb talked about his brother not as a tragedy, but as a person. About his laugh, his terrible singing voice, his optimism that never quite died no matter how hard life got. About the dreams they'd shared and the future they'd planned. Clara listened and understood that this baby would carry that legacy too. Would be part of the family. Caleb's brother had wanted, but never got to see. We should name them after him, she said. If it's a boy. Would you want that? Caleb's voice was rough when he answered. Yeah, I'd want that. The summer passed in a haze of heat and anticipation. Claire's body changed in ways that fascinated and terrified her. Her belly swelled, her back ached, her ankles disappeared beneath stubborn swelling. She couldn't ride anymore, couldn't lift heavy things, couldn't work the way she had before. It made her irritable. I'm useless, she complained one particularly hot afternoon in August, watching Caleb haul water she couldn't carry. You're growing a human being. That's not useless. I should be helping more. You are helping. You're keeping yourself and the baby healthy. He set down the bucket. Stop trying to do everything. I'm not trying to do everything. I'm trying to do something. She wiped sweat from her forehead. I hate being limited like this. Caleb crouched in front of her chair. I know, but fighting it won't change it. His hand rested gently on her belly. Just a few more months. Then you can go back to doing too much and arguing with me about rest. Despite herself, Clara smiled. You promise? I promise. But the truth was, pregnancy scared her more than she wanted to admit. Beth Crawford had been frank about the dangers: bleeding, fever, babies that came too early or too late or wrong. Women died in childbirth all the time out here. Young women, healthy women, women who'd done everything right. Clara tried not to think about it, tried to focus on preparing instead, sewing tiny clothes, organizing the small room they'd added to the house, making lists of supplies they'd need. Caleb built a cradle from oak he'd been saving, carved it with the same careful attention he'd given to the wooden bird. The Crawford children were fascinated by Clara's growing belly. They asked questions with the blunt curiosity of youth, and Clara answered honestly, turning it into impromptu lessons about biology and anatomy. My ma says having babies is the hardest thing a woman does, Emma said one day after class. Your mother's right. Are you scared? Clara considered lying, then decided against it. Yes, but being scared doesn't mean I can't do it. Just means I have to be careful and smart about it. Emma nodded, absorbing this. I think you'll be a good mother. The words hit Clara unexpectedly hard. What makes you say that? You're patient with us, even when we're being stupid. And you explain things so we understand instead of just getting mad when we don't." Emma shrugged. That seems like what a good mother would do. After the girl left, Clara sat alone in the barn classroom and cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of responsibility. A child would depend on her completely, would need her to be patient and wise and strong even when she felt none of those things. What if she failed? What if she was a terrible mother? What if she couldn't protect this baby from all the dangers the frontier would throw at them? That evening, she told Caleb about her fears.
"What if I'm not good at this?" she asked. "What if I mess everything up?"
"Then you'll mess up, and we'll figure it out together." He pulled her close. "No one knows how to be a parent before they become one. We'll learn as we go." That's not very reassuring. It's honest. He tilted her chin up to look at him. "Listen to me. You taught yourself to survive on a frontier ranch when you'd never done manual labor in your life. You made it through a winter that killed stronger people. You built a school from nothing and taught children who had no other chance at education. If you can do all that, you can figure out how to take care of a baby." Clara wanted to believe him. "And if something goes wrong, during the birth, I mean," his face went tight. "It won't. But if it does, it won't." His voice was fierce. "I won't let it. Beth Crawford will be here. I'll have the doctor on standby. We'll have everything ready. You're going to be fine." She heard the desperation underneath his certainty. He was trying to convince himself as much as her. "Caleb, look at me." She waited until his eyes met hers. "If something happens, if you have to choose, don't." He pulled away. "Don't ask me that." "Save the baby," she said firmly. "That's what I want. If it comes to a choice, you save the baby." "No." His jaw was set. "Absolutely not." "Caleb," I said, "no. I won't lose you, Clara. I can't." His hands were shaking. "My brother died because I couldn't save him. I'm not losing you too." She saw the raw fear in him then, the wound that had never fully healed. "You didn't kill your brother. The storm did." "I should have stopped him from going out. Should have gone myself. Should have known the future. Should have controlled the weather." Clara took his face in her hands. "You can't save everyone, Caleb. Sometimes terrible things happen, and it's no one's fault." "Then why does it feel like my fault?" "Because you loved him. Because grief needs somewhere to go, and blame is easier than helplessness." She pressed her forehead to his. "But you can't control this either. All we can do is prepare as best we can and hope it's enough." He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "I can't do this without you." "You won't have to." But she couldn't promise that. Neither of them could. September brought cooler weather and the first hints of fall. Clara's due date was approaching. Beth estimated early October, though no one could be certain. Everything was ready. The cradle sat waiting in the new room. Tiny clothes were folded and stored. Beth had checked on Clara weekly, pronouncing her healthy and strong. The school had to close again. Clara couldn't manage it anymore, not with the constant exhaustion and the way her body had become foreign to her. She missed it desperately, but there was no choice. One evening in late September, Caleb came in from the barn with something hidden behind his back. "Close your eyes," he said. "Why?" "Just do it." Clara closed her eyes, heard rustling, then felt something placed in her lap. When she opened her eyes, she found a quilt, beautifully pieced together from scraps of fabric in blues and greens and soft yellows. "Beth made it," Caleb said quickly. "I just helped pick the colors. Thought the baby should have something nice." Clara ran her hands over the careful stitching, the intricate pattern. "This must have taken weeks. Beth started it when you first told us you were expecting. She finished it last week." He sat beside her. "She said every baby deserves to be welcomed properly." The kindness of it overwhelmed her. Out here, where survival took everything you had, people still found time and energy to create beauty for a child they hadn't met yet. "We should name her something strong," Clara said softly. "The baby, I mean. If it's a girl." "You think it's a girl?" "I don't know. Just a feeling." She folded the quilt carefully. "Your brother's name if it's a boy, but if it's a girl, something that means she can be more than what the world expects." Caleb thought for a moment. "My mother's name was Sarah. She was the strongest person I knew, survived 20 years with my father, and never let him break her spirit completely." "Sarah,"
Clara tested the name. Sarah Vance. I like it. And if it's a boy? James, after your brother.
Caleb nodded, his throat working. James or Sarah? That's good. That's right. The contraction started 3 days later, in the middle of the night. Clara woke to pain radiating through her lower back, sharp and insistent. She lay still for a moment, trying to determine if this was the real thing or another false alarm. But when the next wave hit, stronger than before, she knew. Caleb, she shook his shoulder. It's time. He was awake instantly, on his feet, pulling on clothes. You're sure? I'm sure. All right. I'll get Beth. You stay here. Don't move. Don't do anything. He was at the door, then back, kissing her forehead. I'll be fast. Caleb, breathe. I'm breathing. No, you're panicking. There's a difference. Despite the pain, Clara managed a smile. I'll be fine for an hour. Just go. He left at a run. Clara heard the horse pounding away into the darkness and was suddenly, terrifyingly alone. Another contraction hit. She breathed through it the way Beth had taught her, counting slowly, focusing on relaxing instead of tensing. When it passed, she made herself get up, light the lamps, boil water. Stay busy. Stay calm. By the time Caleb returned with Beth, the contractions were coming regularly. Beth took one look at Clara and nodded approvingly. You're doing good. How far apart? 10 minutes, maybe? Good. We've got time. Beth set down her bag and started unpacking supplies. Caleb, I need you to keep water hot and stay out of the way unless I call for you. I'm not leaving her. You're not leaving the house, but you're not staying in this room either. Trust me, you don't want to see this part. Beth, out. Beth pointed at the door. You can come back when I tell you to. Caleb looked at Clara, who nodded. I'll be fine. Beth knows what she's doing. He left reluctantly, and Beth turned to Clara with a frank expression. Now then, let's see where we are. The next hours blurred together in waves of pain and brief respites. Beth was calm and competent, guiding Clara through each stage, explaining what was happening, what to expect. Tom Crawford arrived at some point. Caleb must have asked him to come, just in case. Clara heard them talking in low voices beyond the door, heard Caleb's fear in every word, Tom's steady reassurance. Women do this every day, Tom was saying. Clara's strong. She'll be fine. You don't know that. No, but worrying won't change anything, so you might as well believe it'll be all right. The pain intensified as dawn approached. Clara had never experienced anything like it, pain that erased everything else, that made the world contract to just this moment, this breath, this contraction. Beth stayed with her through all of it, coaching her, encouraging her, occasionally snapping at her to focus when the pain threatened to overwhelm her completely. I can't, Clara gasped during one particularly brutal contraction. I can't do this. You are doing this. You don't have a choice now. Beth's voice was firm. The baby's coming whether you're ready or not. So you push when I tell you to push, and you breathe when I tell you to breathe. Understand? Clara nodded, too exhausted to argue. Good. Now push. She pushed, over and over, until every muscle in her body screamed, until she was sure she couldn't push once more. Then Beth said, One more. Give me one more big push. Clara gathered every scrap of strength she had left and pushed. And then, impossibly, miraculously, there was a cry. It's a girl, Beth said, her voice warm. A healthy baby girl. Clara collapsed back against the pillows, hardly able to process the words. A girl. A daughter. Beth worked quickly, cleaning the baby, checking her over with practiced efficiency. Then she wrapped her in a blanket and placed her in Clara's arms. Clara looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt something crack open in her chest. This was her daughter, this small, fierce creature who'd fought her way into the world. Hello, Sarah, she whispered. The baby's eyes opened, dark and unfocused, and Clara fell completely, irrevocably in love. Can I let your husband in now? Beth asked, smiling. He's been pacing holes in my floor for the past hour. Yes, please. The door opened and Caleb entered, his face pale and strained. His eyes went immediately to Clara, scanning her for damage, then to the bundle in her arms. Are you? We're fine. Clara shifted the baby so he could see her better. Come meet your daughter. Caleb approached slowly, like he was afraid sudden movement might shatter the moment. He stood beside the bed, looking down at the baby with an expression of absolute wonder. She's so small. She won't be for long. Beth was cleaning up, giving them space while staying close. She's got good lungs. You heard that cry. And a strong heartbeat. She's healthy. Clara's healthy. Everything went as well as could be hoped. Caleb reached out hesitantly, touched one tiny hand with his finger. The baby's fingers wrapped around it reflexively, and his face transformed. Sarah, he said softly. Her name's Sarah. After your mother, Clara confirmed. He looked at her then, and she saw tears in his eyes. Thank you for being all right. For her. For everything. We did this together, Clara said. Just like everything else. Beth cleared her throat. I'm going to give you two some privacy, but I'll be right outside if you need anything. And Clara, you need to rest. Proper rest. Not just closing your eyes for 5 minutes. After she left, Caleb sat carefully on the edge of the bed. He couldn't seem to stop staring at the baby. I was so scared, he admitted. Thought I was going to lose you. I was scared too. Clara leaned against him. But we made it. We made her. Wonder filled his voice. We made a whole person. We did. They sat together in the quiet morning light, looking at their daughter, feeling the weight of what they'd created. A new life, a new beginning, a reason to keep building, keep fighting, keep surviving. Sarah made a small sound, not quite a cry, just a noise of discontent. Clara adjusted her hold and the baby settled. I don't know what I'm doing, Clara said quietly. Neither do I. Caleb's hand covered hers. But we'll figure it out. Same way we've figured out everything else. The next weeks were a blur of exhaustion and wonder. Sarah demanded constant attention, feeding, changing, soothing. Clara had never been so tired in her life. Even the brutal winter hadn't compared to the relentless sleeplessness of caring for a newborn. Caleb helped as much as he could. He walked the floor with Sarah when she cried at night. He changed diapers with the same careful attention he gave to everything else. He sat with Clara during the endless feedings, talking quietly to keep her awake. I thought the hard part would be the birth, Clara said one night, half delirious with exhaustion. This is so much harder. Want me to take her for a while? No. Yes, I don't know. Clara looked down at Sarah, who was finally sleeping. How do people do this? How do they survive this stage? 1 day at a time. 1 hour at a time. Caleb took the baby carefully, held her against his chest. Go sleep. I've got her. But she'll need to eat soon. Then I'll wake you. But until then, sleep. Clara didn't have the energy to argue. She stumbled to bed and was unconscious within seconds. She woke 2 hours later to silence. Panic flooded through her. Why wasn't Sarah crying? And she rushed to the main room. Caleb was asleep in the chair. Sarah still cradled against his chest, both of them breathing peacefully. Clara stood in the doorway watching them, her heart so full it hurt. This rough, blunt man who'd promised her nothing but hard work and honesty was holding their daughter like she was made of spun glass. His face, even in sleep, was softer than she'd ever seen it. This was her family, her home, the life she'd built from desperation and stubbornness and a stranger's respect. It wasn't perfect. It was hard and exhausting and sometimes overwhelming, but it was real. It was hers, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. As fall progressed toward winter, they settled into new rhythms. Clara learned to function on broken sleep. Caleb learned to split his attention between ranch work and family. Sarah grew and changed daily, becoming more alert, more responsive. The Crawford children came to visit, brought by their mother who wanted to check on Clara and meet the baby. She's beautiful, Emma breathed, looking at Sarah with reverence. She's loud, Clara said honestly, and she doesn't sleep. But yes, she's beautiful. Beth laughed. That's motherhood, beautiful chaos. Clara found that to be accurate. Chaos, certainly. The house was messier than it had ever been, her schedule completely upended. But there was beauty in it too, in Sarah's first smile, in the way she'd calm when Caleb sang to her in his rough voice, in the simple fact that they were all alive and together. The school remained closed. Clara missed it, but couldn't manage it yet. Maybe in the spring, she thought, when Sarah was older and more settled. In November, the first snow came. Clara stood at the window holding Sarah, watching white fall from the gray sky, and felt none of the fear from last year. "We'll make it," she said to the baby. "We made it through last winter. This one won't beat us either." Caleb came up behind them, wrapped his arms around both of them. "Talking to yourself?" "Talking to our daughter, teaching her early that Vances don't quit." "Damn right we don't." He kissed the top of Clara's head. "Though I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to quit sometimes." "The thought has crossed my mind." Clara leaned back against him. "But then I remember I have nowhere else to go. This is home." "You could go back to Boston, start over." "Why would I want to? Everything I care about is here." She felt him relax against her. "Good. Because I'd have to come drag you back." "Would you?" "Absolutely. Can't run this place without you." He paused. "Don't want to run it without you." It was the closest he'd come to saying he loved her. Caleb didn't use those words easily, probably never had them spoken to him growing up, didn't know how to shape them in his mouth. But he showed it in 100 other ways. In the cradle he'd built, in the way he took night shifts with Sarah without complaint, and how he'd held Clara through the fear and pain of childbirth. "I love you too," she said quietly. His arms tightened around her. "Yeah?" "Yeah." They stood together at the window, their daughter between them, watching winter arrive. Outside, the wind picked up and snow fell harder, but inside the fire burned warm and steady. Clara thought about the woman who'd arrived at that dusty platform over a year ago, desperate, overlooked, certain this was her last chance. That woman had been right. It was her last chance. But she'd been wrong about what that meant. It wasn't the end of hope. It was the beginning of everything else. That second winter was different from the first. Not easier. Winter on the frontier was never easy, but bearable in ways Clara hadn't expected. They had systems now, routines built from hard-won experience. They knew how much firewood to cut, how to ration supplies, when to bring the cattle in close. And they had Sarah, who turned even the darkest days into something worth surviving. The baby was 4 months old when the real cold set in. Too young to understand the danger outside their walls, but old enough to sense tension. She'd fuss when Caleb was gone too long checking the herd, settle only when both her parents were close. "She knows," Clara said one evening, rocking Sarah while Caleb thawed frozen hands by the stove. "She can tell when we're worried." "Smart girl." Caleb flexed his fingers, wincing. "Takes after her mother, or her stubborn father who won't wear proper gloves." "Gloves make it hard to work." "Frostbite makes it harder." Clara shifted Sarah to one arm and reached for the salve Beth had given them. "Come here." He submitted to her care with the same grudging patience he showed everything, letting her rub ointment into his cracked, reddened skin. These moments of tending each other had become part of their language, the way they showed love without the words that still came awkwardly to both of them. "Tom says there's talk of building a proper schoolhouse in Sweetwater," Caleb said as she worked. "Town's growing, more families settling." Clara's hand stilled. "A real school? With a salary and everything. Town council's looking for a teacher." He met her eyes. "They asked about you." Her heart kicked. "They did?" "Beth mentioned you to Mayor Sykes. He remembered you from the bride gathering, remembered you were a teacher." Caleb paused. "It'd mean riding into town 3 days a week, long days, but the pay's decent, and they'd work around Sarah. You could bring her when she's small, arrange care when she's older." Clara set down the salve, her mind racing. A real teaching position. Steady income. The chance to reach more children than just the handful who could make it to their ranch. "What do you think?" she asked carefully. "I think you should do it if you want it." He said it simply. "You've been itching to get back to teaching. This is better than what we rigged up in the barn." "But it would mean leaving you alone here 3 days a week. And the money from the ranch is getting better. We came through winter last year without losing the herd. This year we'll actually turn a profit." His mouth quirked. "Besides, I survived alone before you came. I can manage 3 days a week." Clara studied his face, looking for resentment or uncertainty. Found neither. Just honest support for something she wanted. "I'll think about it," she said. But she already knew her answer. She started teaching in Sweetwater that spring, when Sarah was 7 months old. The schoolhouse was a simple building. 1 room, wooden benches, a pot-bellied stove, but it felt like a palace compared to the barn. She had 15 students ranging from 6 to 14, children of ranchers and merchants, and the few professional families settling in town. The first day she stood in front of them with Sarah strapped to her back in a carrier Beth had sewn and said, "I'm Mrs. Vance. I know most of you have had little to no formal schooling. That's all right. We'll start where you are and build from there. But I expect effort. I expect respect. And I expect you to take your education seriously because out here, what you learn might be the difference between surviving and thriving." They stared at her, some skeptical, some curious, some openly hostile. She recognized that look. The doubt. The assumption that a woman, especially one with a baby on her back, couldn't possibly teach them anything useful. Clara smiled. "Now then, let's talk about why you should care about mathematics." By the end of that first week, even the hostile ones were paying attention. She came home exhausted those teaching days, but alive in ways she'd forgotten she could feel. Caleb would have dinner ready, simple food, but hot, and take Sarah while Clara decompressed. "How was it?" he'd ask. And she'd tell him about the children, their progress, their struggles, about the satisfaction of watching understanding dawn, of knowing she was shaping minds that would shape the territory's future. "You're good at this," Caleb said one evening. "Better than good. Important. It's just teaching. It's not just anything." He looked at her seriously. "You're building the next generation. That matters more than cattle or ranching or any of the stuff I do. We're both building something, just different parts. Maybe, but yours will last longer." Clara thought about that conversation often over the next months, about legacy and purpose and what they were creating together, not just a ranch, not just a family, but something that would ripple forward into a future they'd never see. Sarah took her first steps in June, tumbling across the kitchen floor into Caleb's waiting arms. They both cheered like she'd accomplished something miraculous, which, in the way of all parents, they believed she had. "She's going to be walking before we know it," Clara said, watching Caleb coax their daughter into trying again. "Then running, then leaving. That's a long way off." "Not as long as you think." Clara felt a familiar flutter in her stomach, one she'd been ignoring for weeks but couldn't deny anymore. "Caleb, I need to tell you something." He looked up, read her expression. "You're pregnant again. How did you get this look? Same one you had with Sarah." He set the baby down carefully and came to Clara. "How far along?" 2 months, maybe 3. I wasn't sure at first, with Sarah still nursing and my courses being irregular, but..." She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. "Yes, I'm pregnant." This time there was no panic in his face, just quiet joy and something that looked like pride. "Another one. We're having another baby. Are you all right with that? I know it's soon and money's still tight," and he kissed her, cutting off the worried rambling. When he pulled back, his eyes were soft. "I'm more than all right with it. I'm grateful." "For what?" "For this. For you. For the family we're building." His hand stayed on her stomach. "For the chance to do better than my father did. To give our children what I never had." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "You're already doing that. You're a good father, Caleb." "I'm trying to be." He glanced at Sarah, who'd crawled over to pull herself up on his leg. "Still scared I'll mess it up somehow." "We both will. That's part of parenting." She covered his hand with hers. "But we'll mess it up together, and we'll fix it together, and eventually they'll grow up and mess things up on their own." Comforting thought, isn't it? They stood together in the evening light filtering through the window, Sarah between them, another child growing in Clara's belly, and felt the weight of what they were building. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and solid, and theirs. The second pregnancy was harder than the first. Clara was chasing a toddler while teaching 3 days a week and trying to keep up with ranch work. Her body was tired, worn down by Sarah's infancy and the constant demands of frontier life. By the time she was 6 months along, she could barely stay on her feet through a full day of teaching. "You need to stop," Caleb said when he found her sitting on the floor one evening, too exhausted to make it to a chair. "I can't. The children need..." "The children will survive. You need to rest. We need the money. We'll manage without it." He lifted her gently, carried her to bed. "You're pushing too hard." "I've always pushed too hard. That's how I survive." "You're not just surviving anymore. You're pregnant and raising a child and working yourself to collapse." His voice was firm. Something has to give, Clara. I'd rather it not be you.
She knew he was right. But the thought of giving up teaching again, of losing that part of herself, felt like suffocation. In the end, they compromised. Clara reduced her teaching to 2 days a week and brought in Emma Crawford to help with the younger students. It wasn't perfect, but it kept her involved while giving her body the rest it needed.
The baby, a boy they named James, after Caleb's brother, arrived in February during a blizzard that made Sarah's birth look easy by comparison. Beth couldn't make it through the storm. Clara labored alone with only Caleb to help, both of them terrified but trying not to show it. You remember what Beth taught you? Clara gasped between contractions. Some of it, maybe. Hell, I don't know. Caleb's face was pale. Clara, I can't do this. We need Beth.
We don't have Beth. We have each other. Another contraction hit and she gripped his hand hard enough to hurt. You can do this. I trust you. Those words steadied him. He'd delivered calves before. The mechanics weren't that different, though he'd never tell Clara that comparison. He washed his hands, boiled water, tried to remember everything Beth had done. When James finally came, small and angry and perfect, Caleb caught him with shaking hands and nearly wept with relief. He cleaned the baby clumsily, wrapped him in blankets, placed him in Clara's exhausted arms. We did it, he said, voice rough. You did it. I just pushed. Clara looked down at their son, then up at Caleb. Thank you for not panicking. I panicked plenty, just didn't let you see it. They laughed together, exhausted, relieved, overwhelmed. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, their family had grown by one more. Sarah was not impressed with her new brother. At 16 months, she'd been the center of attention and didn't appreciate the competition. She'd push at the baby when no one was looking, cry when Clara held him, generally make her displeasure known. She'll adjust, Beth said when she finally made it through the storm 3 days later. First children always struggle when they're dethroned. She's miserable. I'm miserable. James cries constantly. Clara felt tears threaten. I can't do this. 2 children and the ranch and teaching, it's too much. Then stop trying to do it all. Beth's voice was practical. You're one person, Clara. You can't be a perfect mother and wife and teacher and rancher all at once. I'm not trying to be perfect. I'm just trying to survive. Surviving doesn't mean doing everything. It means knowing what to let go. Beth checked James's swaddling. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to fail at things. That's being human. The trick is failing at things that matter less and succeeding at things that matter more. Clara thought about that for a long time, about what mattered most, about what she could let go without losing herself. She stopped teaching entirely for 6 months. Stopped trying to keep the house perfectly clean. Stopped pushing herself to match Caleb's work on the ranch. Focused instead on just getting through each day with 2 small children and a husband who was doing his best, but couldn't breastfeed or soothe Sarah's jealous tantrums. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. Harder than the winters, harder than childbirth, harder than the years of rejection before she came to Wyoming. Letting go of her expectations, her need to prove herself worthy, her fear that rest meant weakness. But slowly, it got easier. Sarah adjusted to having a brother. James's colic faded. Clara's body healed. And one morning, she woke up and realized she'd slept through the night for the first time in months. You look better, Caleb said over breakfast. I feel better. Almost human again. Clara watched Sarah feed herself messily while James dozed in the cradle. I think we might actually survive this. Never doubted it. Liar. I heard you praying to every deity you could think of during those first weeks. Caleb had the grace to look sheepish. Figured it couldn't hurt. She resumed teaching that fall, but only 1 day a week. Emma Crawford had proven herself capable and took over the rest. Clara found she didn't mind as much as she'd expected. Being part of something was enough, even if she wasn't leading it. The years that followed blurred together in the way time does when you're raising children. Sarah grew into a serious, determined girl who helped with the ranch work and asked endless questions. James was quieter, but watchful, absorbing everything around him. Together they filled the house with noise and chaos and joy. Clara and Caleb added another room to the house, then another. The ranch grew steadily, not wealthy, but comfortable. They hired help during busy seasons, built relationships with neighboring ranches, became part of the community they'd once been strangers to. On their 5th anniversary, Caleb took Clara into Sweetwater for dinner at the hotel, a rare luxury.
They sat across from each other in the dining room, dressed in their best clothes, feeling almost like different people from the desperate woman and gruff rancher who'd met at a bride gathering. "Remember when you proposed a 3-day trial?" Clara asked, sipping wine that tasted like possibility. "I proposed a practical partnership. You're the one who turned it into a marriage." But his eyes were warm. "Best decision you ever made, asking me." "Best decision I ever made, saying yes to you in the first place." He reached across the table, took her hand. "I know I don't say it enough, but I love you, Clara. Not just for what you do or how you help with the ranch. I love you." Clara felt her throat tighten. Caleb still didn't use those words easily. They came out rough and unpracticed, but when he said them, she knew he meant them completely. "I love you too, even when you track mud through my clean kitchen." Especially then. They laughed, and Clara thought about the woman who'd stood on that platform so long ago, certain she was facing her final chance. She'd been so wrong about what that meant. It hadn't been her last chance at a conventional life, or at being chosen by someone desperate enough to overlook her age. It had been her first real chance, the chance to build something authentic, to be seen for who she actually was, not who she pretended to be. To fail and succeed and struggle and triumph with someone who understood that partnership meant carrying each other through the hard parts. 10 years after that first meeting, Clara stood in front of her school. The building had been expanded twice to accommodate the growing town, and looked at the faces of her students. 23 children now, ranging from 6 to 16. She'd taught most of their parents. Some of them were her own children. Sarah sat in the back, 13 now, and too cool to sit near the front. James was in the middle rows, 10 years old and already showing signs of becoming a scholar. And there was Emma, now 16 and serving as Clara's assistant teacher, preparing to take over entirely when Clara finally retired. "Today we're going to talk about resilience," Clara said. "About what it means to keep going when everything seems impossible. About how the choices we make in desperate moments can shape entire lives." She didn't tell them her own story. That wasn't the point. But she let it inform her teaching, let it shape how she talked about hardship and hope and the space between giving up and pushing forward. After class, Emma stayed behind to help organize materials. "Mrs. Vance, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it? Coming out here, I mean. Giving up your life in Boston for this?" Clara looked around the simple schoolroom, at the books she'd fought to get funding for, at the slates covered in children's handwriting, at the map on the wall showing a territory that was slowly becoming states. "No," she said honestly, "I regret a lot of things. Mistakes I've made, opportunities I've missed, times I've failed my children or my husband or myself. But coming here, choosing this life, that I don't regret. Even though it was so hard. Especially because it was hard." Clara met the girl's eyes. "Easy things don't change you. They don't teach you what you're capable of. I came here thinking I was desperate and broken. I learned I was stronger than I knew." Emma absorbed this. "I want to leave someday, see more of the world, but I'm scared I'll fail." "You probably will fail at some things. Everyone does." Clara smiled. "But failure isn't the end unless you let it be. It's just information, data about what doesn't work, so you can try something else." "That's what you did? After all those bride gatherings where you weren't chosen?" "That's what I did. I kept trying until I found something worth being chosen for." Clara paused. "Though in the end, I think Caleb and I chose each other. Neither of us was settling. We were both making the best decision we could with what we had." That evening, Clara walked home through the spring twilight. The ranch house rose ahead of her, larger now, more solid, with smoke curling from the chimney and lamplight glowing in the windows. She could see Caleb moving around inside, probably starting dinner. Hear the children's voices raised in some argument that would resolve itself before she arrived. This was her life, the one she'd built from rejection and desperation and a stranger's respectful offer. It wasn't perfect. Some days it was barely manageable, but it was real and earned and hers. She thought about that woman on the platform, about the fear and shame she'd carried, about how certain she'd been that being overlooked meant she had no value, how wrong she'd been. Being overlooked had been the best thing that ever happened to her. It had forced her to look beyond conventional measures of worth, to value things like partnership and resilience and honest respect. It had brought her to Caleb, who'd seen past youth and beauty to something more lasting. Clara opened the door to warmth and chaos. Sarah was setting the table while complaining about her brother. James was reading in the corner, ignoring her. Caleb looked up from the stove and smiled, the soft, private smile he saved just for her. "Good day?" he asked. "Good day," she confirmed. And it was. Not because everything was easy or perfect, but because she'd learned that good days weren't about absence of struggle. They were about having people to struggle with, about building something that mattered, about knowing that even on the hard days, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 20 years after arriving in Wyoming, Clara stood at a podium in the new town hall. Sweetwater had grown into a proper town, nearly 300 people now, with businesses and churches and a newspaper. And they were dedicating the new school building, the largest in the territory, funded by territorial grants and local donations. Mayor Sykes, older now but still recognizable, stood to introduce her. Most of you know Mrs. Vance as our longtime teacher, but what you might not know is how she came to Sweetwater. She was one of the bride-gathering women, back when this town was barely more than a few buildings and a lot of hope. He smiled at Clara. She took a chance on this place, and this place is better for it. Clara stepped to the podium, looking out at the assembled crowd. She saw her family in the front row, Caleb, gray now at the temples but still solid. Sarah, 18 and planning to attend the new teaching college in Denver. James, 15 and already taller than his father. And 3 more children they'd had over the years, filling the spaces between. She saw former students, now parents themselves, bringing their own children to the school she'd helped build. Saw Beth Crawford, older but still sharp-eyed. Saw the community that had formed around this unlikely place. "I came here believing I was worthless," Clara said quietly. "I'd been rejected so many times I'd started to believe what those rejections implied, that I wasn't good enough, wasn't valuable enough, wasn't worth choosing." The room was silent. "But I learned something in this place with these people. Worth isn't about being chosen. It's about what you choose to build, who you choose to become, how you choose to contribute to something larger than yourself." She paused. "I chose to build a life here, to teach your children, to help shape this community. And in doing that, I found value I didn't know I possessed." She looked at Caleb, who was watching her with quiet pride. "I also learned that the right partnership isn't about one person choosing another. It's about 2 people choosing to build something together, about respect and honesty and shared purpose." Clara took a breath. "This school represents all of that. It's not just a building. It's a choice. To invest in the next generation, to believe in education, to build something that will outlast all of us. Thank you for making that choice. Thank you for letting me be part of it." The applause was warm and genuine. Clara stepped down from the podium and into Caleb's arms. "Good speech," he murmured against her hair. "Think they got the point?" "I think you told them what they needed to hear." He pulled back to look at her. "You told them your truth. That's all anyone can do." That night, after the celebration ended and the children were asleep, Clara and Caleb sat on their porch watching stars appear. They'd done this countless times over the years, found quiet moments amid the chaos to just be together. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Clara asked. "If you'd arrived at that bride gathering 5 minutes earlier and chosen someone else?" "No," Caleb said it simply. "I chose you. There was never anyone else I would have chosen." "You couldn't have known that. You barely knew me. I knew enough. I knew you were still standing when everyone else had given up. I knew you had strength that wasn't obvious until you looked for it." He took her hand. "I knew you were exactly what I needed, even if I didn't have words for it then." Clara leaned against him, comfortable in the silence they'd built over 20 years. "We did all right, didn't we? For 2 desperate people making a practical arrangement, we did better than all right." Caleb's voice was soft. "We built something real, something that lasts." And they had. Not just the ranch, which now supported 3 hired hands and turned steady profit. Not just the children, who were growing into capable, thoughtful people. But something less tangible and more important, a legacy of education and community, of showing that worth came from contribution rather than conventional markers of success. Clara Vance, once Clara Whitlock, unwanted schoolteacher from Boston, had become the woman the community turned to for guidance, the teacher who shaped generations, the partner who'd helped transform a struggling ranch into a thriving operation. The mother who'd raised children to value resilience and honesty. Not because she was perfect. She'd made countless mistakes over the years, lost her temper with students, fought with Caleb over money and decisions, struggled with the balance between her own needs and her family's demands. But she'd kept trying, kept building, kept choosing to show up even when it was hard.
That was the real lesson, Clara thought. Not that worth came from being chosen, but from how you responded when you weren't.
Not that success meant avoiding failure, but that resilience meant getting up after failing and trying again. Not that love was about perfect harmony, but about choosing to work through discord towards something stronger. She'd come to Wyoming broken and desperate, certain she was facing her last chance. She'd been right about that. It was her last chance. But what she hadn't understood then, what she could only see looking back across 20 years of struggle and growth, was that last chances could become new beginnings, that endings could transform into foundations for building something better. The woman no one chose had chosen herself, had chosen to be more than her rejections, more than her desperation, more than the narrow definitions of worth she'd internalized. And in doing so, she'd become someone worth choosing. Not by strangers at a bride gathering, but by students who returned year after year, by a community that trusted her with their children's futures, by a husband who'd seen her potential when she couldn't see it herself, by children who learned from her example that value came from character, not circumstances. Clara looked out at the ranch she'd helped build, the land she'd learned to love, the sky vast enough to hold all her failures and successes together without judgment. She thought about that platform in Sweetwater 20 years ago, about standing at the edge of hope, about the stranger who'd looked past the pretty faces and seen her. "Thank you," she said quietly. Caleb glanced at her. "For what?" "For seeing me, when no one else did." "I should be thanking you. You could have said no to my crazy proposal, gone back to Boston, built a different life." "This life is exactly enough." Clara squeezed his hand. "More than enough." They sat together as the darkness settled over the Wyoming territory, two people who'd found each other in desperation and built something that transcended their individual limitations. Proof that worth wasn't about being chosen by others, but about choosing to become someone who contributed something meaningful to the world. And Clara Vance, teacher, mother, partner, survivor, had done exactly that.